On today's show, we are back with more of our player capsule series, and Glen Willis is here to talk about Clint Capela with me. This is part 1 of 2, and it's coming to you right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1730 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday here in early June. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, for a new customer, get $150 in terms of dollars and bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. The place to go is FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen here at Locked On Hawks each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify or both, or Overcast. Also, we are on YouTube on the video side. And today's podcast is going to be a continuation of our player capsule series with Glen Willis joining me of ATL and 29, Peachtree Hoops, etc. And today we will be tackling Clint Capela. Again, this is part 1 of 2. So if you want to stay tuned, I definitely encourage you to do that. For part 2, it should be available in your same podcast feed of choice right now. Not a ton else to get to on the news front. I did do a sort of news catch-up / mailbag podcast on Sunday evening into Monday. That's still very much listenable right now, plus tons of NBA draft stuff in recent days from, all kinds of guests, let's just say. If you want to look at the archive, Brian Schroeder, Bryce Simon, etc., all those guys and all that great insight is still available in your same podcast feed of choice. And we'll have more on the draft, but every year we try to dive into the roster as well as the draft at the same time. So here we go, myself and Glenn talking about Clint Capela once again, and this is part 1. It's coming to you. Here we go. I am joined once again by my friend Glen Willis. Glenn, I don't know about you, but everyone in my life comes to me in the streets and they say, "When can we talk about Clint Capela?"
I know this is going to be one that produces zero controversy. There will be no comments under the YouTube, published, episode here, and or if there are, they'll all be glowingly positive about Clint. So. Right. all roses and all the rest here with Clint.
That's right. And if you are a new listener, what we have done the last couple of years and also this year, Glenn has been gracious enough to give me a bunch of time, which I'm appreciative of, and we talk about players on the Hawks roster in what we like to describe as somewhat holistic fashion. Like, you can't talk about every single aspect of a player, and even if we go an hour like we often do, but we try to paint the whole picture, right, of what happened this year, what the player is, age stuff, future stuff, offense, defense, nuance, all that stuff. And that's what we're doing today. I'll just say this now. We're recording this in very early June. Last year, I think we pretty much did the entire roster except for Trey before the draft. We're not going to make it this year. We're picking some guys who are – this is not intentional necessarily, but I would say Clint is on this list of guys who could conceivably be traded before we end up doing more player capsules in July and August. And in fact, most recently on Sunday, I did a podcast that was a solo show about kind of the latest intel out there. And like Mark Steiner reported that Clint's available. And it was kind of like, yeah, no duh, he's available. But that's one of those things that we'll kind of get into along the way here. But as we always do with these guys, let's just start broad. And, Clint just turned 30 after the season. He finished his 10th NBA season. Clint's been around for a long time. 10th NBA season is in the books. Played a lot of games this year, 73 games. Only DJ and Bogey played more games on the Hawks roster. Before we sort of dig in a little bit, what was your overall impression of Capela? Because as we sort of joke about, always polarizing in the fan base, but was healthy and available this year. Obviously had some nagging stuff, as he almost always seems to, but he was out there for as much as the center is usually going to be out there, and generally was regarded, at least by the numbers, as a positive contributor this year.
Yeah, I mean, he's still a very reliable defensive big man. He's still one of the top 10, I'll say 10 rebounders in the league, whatever number you want to pick there. He's smart as hell on both ends of the court. He absolutely knows what he's doing from a tactical standpoint in terms of helping his ball handlers on defense, organizing, all that sort of stuff. But I think it's, for Hawks fans that say Clint looked different this year, I think that's fair. Couple things there. One is they were running a scheme. We talked about it the whole season. We don't need to spend 15 minutes talking about it. They're running a scheme that wasn't this, the very best for Clint to kind of do his thing, right? They were getting him all the way to the level a lot. And it's kind of funny. Some people want to say he was terrible at it. He was not terrible at it.
No.
When he was physically right, he's pretty good at it. When he wasn't physically, when he didn't look physically right, I guess I'll use those words, he wasn't as good at it. And so I think this was a different year in that in the previous season, Clint has had kind of, a week here, a week there throughout a whole season where he just doesn't look like he's running quite as well. His verticality is not the same. This week it felt more, or this year it felt more like, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks cumulatively, where he was just kind of not, the normal kind of bouncy and, agile kind of, big man that you would expect. So that, I think that was there. How much of that was the scheme that they were playing being more, it is more work to get way up the floor, and all of that. So that's there. The other part was, for Hawks fans, I want to say his finishing was a problem this year. What I will say is that Hawks fans who said his finishing was a problem last year, I disagree with that. Right, he was a totally fine finisher last year. Right now, does it look bad sometimes? Does it look frustrating? Like in the moment,
Yes.
you and I talked about this. Like they're down 6 points with 3 minutes to go. He gets a bunny right at the rim and he misses, and you're like, "That's a kill." That one right there is a killer. And I understand the reaction from Hawks fans on that. Who were like, "Oh my gosh, that was such an easy shot." And so the drop off finishing was impactful, this year. And so for me, he looks like a guy who's taking one step into, having played, 30,000 minutes in his career, whatever that number, I looked it up earlier this year, but, he's a big man who's played a lot of minutes in his career. And these are the kinds of things that often start to show up here and there as they kind of hit this phase of their career. And I thought that's what we saw this year, but I still think he was their most important defender, start to finish on the whole season. I think he was their most reliable guy, even when they weren't, playing in a scheme that was the best fit for him. And when he's not on the floor, they struggle to rebound. When he's on the floor, they really have no issue rebounding. And so, I know we'll get into kind of how he fits with certain players on the floor with some of his limitations and stuff. But for me, like in a vacuum, an NBA team is just looking for a guy that they could just pencil in at center and kind of hit all the basic check boxes on defense and rebounding. Clint hits all of those. Is he an all-star level player? No. Is he an all NBA, level defender? No. But in terms of just looking for solid, reliable baseline level play in all the important areas, Clint still gives you that, in my view.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's where to take all time right now in the NBA and the NHL. If that was giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $150. That's $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 in terms of bets that you can use on hoops and baseball, hockey, and so much more. But on all of your favorite baseball and basketball players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The app at FanDuel Sportsbook is really easy to use. They have everything that you're looking for in the sports betting space, from over-unders to player props, money lines, future bets, game props, and so much more. The FanDuel app is safe. It's secure. They cover the entire range of sports as well. That includes the NBA, the WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, college baseball in the World Series going on right now, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so much more. And now is an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So this will probably come up a lot during the conversation in different ways, but you throw it out there and you're right. And, I know some of the reaction is going to be that you and I are too high on Clint. I'll take that bullet. It's fine. I know, especially me. I take that bullet all the time. It's fine. And even and you just acknowledge this as well, Clint is not the same athlete player that he was 4 years ago. He just isn't. Even then, I'm sure I was accused of being too high on him. But in 2021, when they made the conference finals run, he was one of the 5 best defenders in the league that year, I thought. He was incredible that season. That guy's gone. He's 30 years old. I get it. But overall, I would say there's a difference between that guy's gone and Clint is now useless, which is where the conversation a lot of the time goes. And that's just generally speaking kind of just silly. So you mentioned the defensive stuff. Let's start on the defense. It's the more important side, not only for him, but also for the center position. Some teams, a small handful of them, rely on their center for a lot of offense. Denver, of course, Embiid, et cetera. There's probably 5 teams in the league that do that. most of the time, though, center is a defense first position on most teams. That includes what the Hawks have been asking him to do. So we'll start there. And by the way, he's better defense than offense. We understand that. But he was their best defender this year. And that's backed by the numbers. Like, he was number one on pretty much all of the advanced catch-all metrics defensively for the Hawks this year. EPM, basketball indexes numbers, Darko, all those numbers. He was number one on the team. That, for me, stacks up. You mentioned the rebounding. Not only is he a great rebounder for himself, which he is, better on offense than defense at this point in time. Offensively, he might be the number one guy in the league, or certainly in the top 2 or 3. Defensively, I think you're right to say he's maybe a top 15 rebounder or whatever defensively, but he's still really good there. And I have a stats sort of dive in here on this front, because rebounding is going to be a big topic. It already is on the draft front about Alex Sarr and stuff like that. Okongwu has always been a rebounding topic, Jalen, etc. But this is a very simple way to describe Clint's value on the glass. Individually, he's great, but as a team this year, the Hawks had a 73.3% defensive rebound rate as a team this year with him on the court. With Clint off the court, that dropped to 70.3%. So a 3 percentage point drop off. Now, that may not seem very big, but it is. Here's what I'll tell you. The number with Clint on the court is a top 5 mark in the league level. That's a top 5 defensive rebounding team in the league with Clint on the court. With Clint off the court, they'd have been number 25 in the league. So essentially, you go from Clint's on the court, you are a top 5 rebounding team on the defensive end of the floor. It's not only Clint. I will not pay. There's always a little bit of noise and on-off stuff, but he is the best rebounder. He's the rebounding force on the team. And when he sat, they were suddenly not just like average, they were really bad on the glass. And the common denominator there is your center and your rebounder and your anchor and your box out guy and all that stuff. So that's only one area. But since you brought it up, I wanted to start with that because, it's not always pretty. Rebounding is sometimes underrated. It could be overrated too. Like you remember those teams in 2015, 2016 that were great defensively, but they couldn't get a rebound sometimes. It was like, oh, Al Horford can't get a rebound. People were really mad. But it matters. Like if you're a really good rebounder and your team especially is really good when you're on the court, that stuff is a good place to kind of start with Clint. And of course, he does other things too, but that's probably the thing that he is still, I would say, most regarded as doing. Like even by people that don't like him, they will at least be able to point at the rebound column like, oh, Clint had 12 rebounds tonight. Like it's a pretty obvious counting stat, but even beyond that, like his impact there is pretty clear.
It is, and it's interesting because if you watch the way that the different coaches in the league like to defend, the older coaches still like to play drop. They believe in keeping their big man in the paint. They believe in keeping their big man close to the rim. And we can even just talk, at a high level through the playoffs. We've seen times where defensive teams were getting their bigs away from the paint and they could not get a rebound in the defensive possession, and it cost them playoff games, right?
Thunder.
The newer coaches, and Quinn will talk. We heard Quinn all year long talk about team rebounding, gang rebounding,
yep.
And if you're going to get your big out of the paint, it really does take everybody kind of contributing to that. But some like Doc Rivers doesn't believe in that. Doc Rivers believes in keeping his center right in the middle of the paint. That's what Nate believed in as well. Kind of Tibbs, similar thing yep. there. Tibbs, it takes like his team has to be really on the ropes before he gets his center up to the level of the screen, because he really believes in leaving his rebounder there. And so it is interesting to think about what you do with Okongwu. Okongwu needing to play with Jalen, and Bay at least works hard as a rebounder. But with Clint on the court, one thing he does is he lets you prioritize other skills in the lineup construction you're using with Clint, because he does just consume so much of the rebounding responsibility. And that gives you a lot more flexibility at how you're going to build the rest of the lineup 1 through 4. And there's, probably, 6 or 7 other centers in the league, maybe, that kind of offer that much stability as a rebounder where you can invest in some other skill areas in lineup construction around him.
Yeah, like I said, it's only one area. Like another thing I want to make sure we hit on is the numbers paint this picture. I know Wes Morton, our mutual friend at Peach Drews, wrote about this a little bit this week in his Capela breakdown, but he was also the best rim protector on the team. And that wasn't just the eye test. The numbers paint that picture as well. He had better numbers at the rim than Okongwu and then Jalen and Bruno. And that doesn't mean he was great at that. He, as we just acknowledged, is not quite the same deterrent that he used to be at the rim. I think that's probably safe to say. Maybe you disagree with me, but that's what I see.
I agree.
But the numbers there are still really good. Like he was still, I'm looking at this now, more than 5 percentage points better than average on field goal percentage allowed at the rim, essentially, which there's some noise in there too. And just to say it out loud, like, it's hard to evaluate the Hawks bigs defensively, not just Clint, a lot because of how bad the perimeter has been the last couple of years. That was going to come up at some point, so I'll just say it out loud now on all of these guys. Okongwu will come up too when we get to him, Jalen even. But I still think that he is a, not a top 5 anchor, but like, I think he's an average or better defensive anchor, rim protector. Like, he knows where to be. I'm preaching to the choir here with you. I'll let you cook on this, but there's also value that people don't care about, but it's true. And knowing how to command a defense, calling out things, communication is, I know, one of your big things, and it's true. You sit courtside. Clint is not the loudest guy in the world, but he is always talking. He's a leader of the defense. He's their anchor. And I think he can still do that at a pretty high level. Again, he's not going to be, pick your number 1 rim protector in the league or whatever. He's not Rudy Gobert defensively at this point. But I think if you lined up the league starting centers, for me, he's still probably above average in what he does in that area as well. And so, again, we're talking about defense first. It's going to get less exciting, everybody. I promise you, for everybody yelling at us right now that we're too positive, it'll get lower as we get going. But he's really good at this still, I feel like. And I feel like I'm glad that Wes pointed it out. I wanted to point it out too before I even read that, is like, he's still pretty deterrent at the rim, just not quite like, I know he's not 7'5", you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that Hawks fans might have forgotten about this year, because in some ways this is the season you want to forget,
of course,
this past season. But this was the first time really we saw some decent sampling of Clint's at center. The other team is running 1-5 pick and roll. The other team's trying to make Trey low man, DeJounte low man, Bogey low man, or whatever. Quinn's like, nope, we're going to put Clint on whoever's in the weak side corner. We're going to use Jalen to defend in the pick and roll, or whoever, Hunter to defend in the pick and roll. And Clint adapted to that role. I think we all remember Robert Williams for the Celtics a few years ago, kind of being the first one that they went really, really heavy. But Clint did great at that this year, and that really matters for the way you're kind of thinking forward. If Clint is on this team again next year, I know that's a huge if, and I know we're probably going to talk a little bit about that too. But when they said, no, Clint, we're gonna kind of make you dedicated low man no matter who's in that weak side, he did great in that role. And I mean, he's probably happy to do it because he's not way up the floor and kind of having to like navigate space and things like that. But I thought Quinn in a way that, like, say, Nate never would have done that. And it's not just Nate, like Nate's, the generation of coaches that Nate is a part of were all similar to their defensive philosophy. But I thought it was interesting to see what it looks like with Clint playing low man with a small forward in the weak side corner. Put him on there, let him be the weak side rim helper. And I just think it's noteworthy that Clint adapted to that quite well, because I think that's a factor for how you see the defense kind of being planned going forward.
Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all carry things around that create stress, whether it's big or small. Whether it keeps things bottled up, it starts to actually get to affect us in a negative way. Therapy is a safe space, though, to get things off your chest. Also figure out just how to work through what happens to be weighing you down in your life. Therapy is helpful for everybody. You can learn positive coping skills and how to set better boundaries with therapy, and also empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just people who have major trauma in their lives as well. I know I have my own stresses when it comes to work in the future, etc., and we can also benefit from getting things off our chest. I know I can as well. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try right now. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and convenient to your schedule with BetterHelp. It's even suited to your schedule, which is huge if you're not getting a time crunch like I often am in my busy daily life. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Get it off your chest right now with the folks at BetterHelp. And the place to go is betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. Get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. One more time, the website to visit is BetterHelp. That's better, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. And one more kind of set of stats here. He was also still in the top 12 in the league in total blocks, block percentage, and blocks per game this year. I played a lot of minutes, but he wasn't playing 30 minutes a game. It was 26 minutes a game this year. Like, he's still blocking shots. He's still a rim deterrent, which is worth acknowledging. And I want to give one broad stat, and then I want to then, just to be in the interest of transparency, I want to ask you what Clint can't do, or what Clint is maybe holding the team back on defensively, because just to be 100% fair on this. Essentially, the on-off splits. Bogey was the on-off king for the Hawks this year, which we'll get to when we get to Bogey at some point. Most of that was offensively, as you might expect for Bogey. Bogey was their offensive unlock this year. Basically, they were awesome when he was on the court. It was just okay when it was off the court. Clint had the second best on-off ratings on the team this year, even better than Trey and even better than DJ, all those guys. And his were defensively, which is not a big surprise. Now, they weren't awesome when Clint was on the court defensively. They were like a little bit below league average, 18, 19, 20th in the league kind of level defensively with Clint on the court, which is not where you want to be, but it's a far cry from where they were when he was off the court. When he was off the court, they were the equivalent of the 28th defense in the league. So that's bottom 3. And that may not seem like much, but we've all said numerous times, if the Hawks would just have the 20th defense versus the 28th defense, that's a big difference. That's probably a 5-6 win difference over the course of the season. And again, there's always noise in these on-off catch-alls, but he was a big factor in making them a better defense. You and I have joked about this before about they were also really good when Hunter and Clint played together. The two guys that everyone seems to hate, DeAndre and Clint, they've always been pretty good defensively when those guys play together. Now, it's not a huge surprise. They both do. But anyway, what do you make of that? And also, look, we have to get into Clint's 30. He's going to be expiring contract. We'll save the contract stuff for later on. But as far as like, where does he hold them back? Because that's one of the things. Just I got questions all year long. I'm sure you did too about like, oh, I wish we had a better rim protector. I wish we had a better this defensively. Is that just because he couldn't make up for the guards, or like where does Clint fall short at this point? Where does that drop off that we acknowledged earlier show up to where it becomes a problem, especially if there's another one coming? Because again, he's 30, about to be 31. It's probably going to go the wrong way versus the right way from this point forward.
Yeah, so there's several areas that's important to talk through here, and this is probably the segment that'll make listeners happy. This we're like, yeah. But number one is I don't trust him. It's switching 1 through 5 the way I did like 2 years ago.
Agreed.
Especially on guards. If it's a wing who has an average ball handling and a little below average self creation, he's probably going to be okay in that setting. But it's not like he was a world beater switching 1 through 5. He's just good enough and situationally, 2 years ago in a way that he's not anymore. Right, getting him way out in space, way up the floor. That's not something I think he can really do reliably anymore. Like I said, I don't want to paint a picture like, oh, he was like some prime Draymond doing it. That's not what he was even 2 years ago. But he would, he'd not embarrass himself, 2 years ago. And when bigs get isolated on guards, what they're mostly trying to do is 2 things. One is bleed the shot clock, just bleed the shot clock. And the second thing is, and this is really just a trend in the last 2 to 3 years in the NBA, when a center gets switched to a guard, their number one responsibility, their coaches will tell them, and this is across the league, is force him inside the 3-point line. We just don't want to give up a wide open step back 3, right? The play we all remember right now is, Gobert getting switched onto Luka. And Rudy said after the game, my job was to push him inside the 3-point line. I didn't do it. That is a principle across the whole league right now, right? And so can Clint do that? I think switching 1 through 5 with Clint on the floor is something that's only occasionally situationally doable, depending upon is the other team, kind of guard hit. Like right now, the Magic, we talked about the Magic's offensive guard play. There's like 3 teams that maybe it's okay. You could do that for a little while, but with him, I'd stay with 1 through 5 switching. The other thing is when the season that they made their conference finals run, their point of attack defense wasn't awesome that year either. And you would see, ball handlers get free run coming straight to the paint. Then Clint could kind of wall up and step up and kind of wall up and cut that off and have a more of an impact. He can't do that to the level he was doing it then either, right? And I think that is mileage, wear and tear, et cetera. And so he's going to be a guy that's more catching that guy as opposed to, stepping up and kind of cutting that off. That's where some of his fouls are going to come from. And so, those things, jump out to me. Even getting to the level, that's an area where you get to the level, you recover. His recovery sometimes looks good. Like, oh, he looks like he's feeling good tonight. Like he's moving well tonight. Another game where it looks like doesn't look like he's moving too great. That recovery from the level of the screen is pretty slow when he's not kind of feeling his best. And so those are the 3 areas I would point out. And that does limit you schematically, like where Okongwu, I think, Okongwu still has to get better at the 1 through 5 switching stuff, but he has kind of the raw tools and all that sort of stuff where Clint doesn't. So what that causes me to think of is, if you can't switch 1 through 5, are you really utilizing a guy like Jalen in the best scheme that you can? You want Jalen's versatility to pop in your defensive scheme, and there are other, defenders too. If you're going to bring along Mo Gay, like a similar thing where you want that defensive versatility to kind of be there. And that is diminished in a way that it wasn't a couple of years ago, where I think you can't do as many different things schematically with Clint because he's just not that guy anymore. And I don't think that's us being critical of Clint. I just think that's us recognizing where he is in his journey, how many years he's played, how many minutes he's logged, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and there's a reason why I kind of wanted to lead with that at the very top, is because there is a difference between, like, he was I think still underrated, the impact he had on that conference finals run, the way he was playing defensively that whole year, really. I just pulled the numbers up just now. Like, the Hawks with him on the court that year were like a top 7 or 8 defense in the league. Like, they were, and this is the Hawks. The personnel was not fantastic, and he was kind of a one-man band and was playing at that level. And, he was 26 at that point. Like, he was kind of in his, still in his prime and all that stuff. And, slippage in a few different areas physically and health-wise. And I know he played a lot of games this year, which is good, but we've talked around it. But there are nights when he has it, nights he doesn't. And that's very obvious to people, even on the outside. Like, I think he would acknowledge it with true serum. Sometimes I've asked Clint before, he doesn't like to acknowledge that, like, at least in an interview with the media. Like, I think it's probably because he thinks it's like an excuse. He's not a big excuse guy. He's pretty frank with the media. Him and Bogey are kind of the guys that are like, call it how it is a lot of the time for the Hawks. But I think you can kind of see it with your eyes, like whether he has it that day physically or not. And look, late in the year, and I'm going to try not to do the late in the year thing too much, because trust me, we've done it, and people will say, what about the rest of the year? And I'm not saying this is the end all be all, but if you see him in his best 3-week stretch, he was really good at the end of the season when he was clearly feeling good and playing really well, and the numbers indicate that. But as he gets older, you have to think there'll be even more bad days or off days or whatever. That's the nature of the beast. And as we'll get into at the very end of this conversation, there's still a world, and people are going to hate this, there's still a world where Clint is still A, on the team this coming season, and B, still their best center. That's very much on the table. That's as a possibility. Because without doing an Okongwu capsule this year, Capela was their best center for most of the season. I know Okongwu was more talented. He's younger, the flashes, all that stuff. On the whole, this is me talking, not you. You might disagree. Capela was still, by the advanced numbers, all this, he was the better player this year. And that might not happen again moving forward. They might trade him, all those things. But he's no longer a guy, how am I going to say this? He's no longer a guy that you build your system around. You might have to in certain ways because of his limitations, but you're not building your defensive system around him to accent his positives. Is that too broad of a way to put that? Because I think the way we're talking about it is, like, 4 years ago, you could have just said, our defensive plan is Clint being a monster. That's very simplistic, but on purpose. Now you can't do that. He could be a part of the machine. He could be a big cog in a good defensive machine, but he cannot be the machine anymore.
Yeah, I think I agree. And the thing for me is, like, guys at the very, very top positionally, they outright, like, rescue possessions. Like,
Right.
A defensive possession is a mess. It's in the ditch, whatever word you want to use. And they step in and just absolutely kind of just pull it out, like, individually, heroic, with their own individual heroics. Clint's not really going to do that anymore. I mean, he might do it, I don't know, 20 times across the whole season, where, he just kind of has the juice for that possession or whatever kind of shows up. But to your point, you can't bank on that, right?
Nope.
That's not what he is anymore. That's not what he's going to be. And then the other part of that is, I feel like how many times we'll be talking about what's the decision with Okongwu? What should it be? Like, Clint's blocking Onyeka,
We're still doing that. It's been 4 years.
I know. What Onyeka be further along? And it's funny because I remember on ATL 29, I want to say in January, I made the comment at one point, they just need to start Onyeka because Onyeka and Jalen need to play together.
Yeah,
and we really didn't get, but yeah, and we really didn't get to see that happen because Clint had a little bit of injury absence, and then Onyeka missed a lot of time late in the season. So I don't think it would have happened. If you're like, Glenn, could have done that? I don't think he would have done that, because, I mean, even when Onyeka was there, he was still closing games with Clint. And even when they were losing by 8 or 10 points the last 4 minutes of the game, which most coaches not that like the Hawks really have one, but put as much shooting on the floor, and Onyeka's a better shooter. Yeah. Right. And Quinn did not do that. Quinn did not go in that direction. And so it's just, so for me, like what the baseline expectation for a coach is, I want a center defensively that's not going to make me lose sleep. They're just going to cover all the basics, hit all the fundamentals. They're going to keep us organized, communicate, all that sort of stuff, and kind of give me that baseline stuff. So, and for me, I think Clint gives you that every single game. Some games he's feeling better. He pops a little more, has a little more impact. Some games, not as much. And that's just where he is, I think, with his body at this point in his career.
Yeah, I actually forgot. I'm glad you mentioned the thing about him starting. And look, my position on starting versus not starting, it's not as big of a deal as people want to think that it is. That's my general position. But, and I said this on the show, but if anybody missed it, the only time in the history of the Okongwu-Capela relationship in which I thought the coach that day or that stretch might start Okongwu over Capela healthy was this year in February. Because Clint had been out. If you remember this, the way it happened was Clint had been out and Onyeka had been playing really well. And it was if they were ever going to do it with Clint on the roster, it was a very natural time because because they could have spun it. You know what I mean? You go to Clint and say, look, we're playing well. O's playing great. You take it easy. And it would have been the only logical time. And I thought they might do it. I really did. I was asking around about it, just kind of poking behind the scenes. And then as soon as that conversation happened for 2 days, Onyeka got hurt, and that was it. So we'll never know if they would have done it. But that's the way I put it. I was like, it was the first time in 4 years that they might have even had the conversation. Because until then, I know fans hate it, Capela is the starter. He's always been the starter. Like, coaches love Clint. That's the thing. And we'll get into the offense, and we'll paint a less rosy picture, I promise you. But you mentioned it before with Nate, Quinn. It wouldn't matter who it was. Coaches are predisposed to loving a player like Clint who is going to execute. He doesn't need the ball. He doesn't, he just wants to do what everybody wants him to do. They're all NBA players. They all have egos, but Clint just does what he's asked to do and anchors and communicates and all that stuff. So maybe they'll change this year. I mean, I will be kind of surprised if they go into another year with Clint and Onyeka as the two centers, but they might. And then we'll get into October, Glenn, and I'll ask you in October, hey, who's going to start at center between Clint and Onyeka? And we're going to do the whole thing again. Yeah. But I can't believe we're still doing this, but alas, it is what it just never ends. The party never ends. I swear to you, if you ask me the night of the draft in 2000, the COVID draft, if they would still have Clint and Onyeka on the team in June 2024, I would have told you there was like a 1% chance, if that. And here we are.
Here we are.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And we talked about going into the last season. Part of it is that their point of attack defense is still bad. They need 48 minutes of at least solid defensive play at center. They can't. And we talked about Bruno earlier, but Bruno is. I don't think Bruno is a guy that can step into a starter role if somebody gets hurt. I think he's your 2B. Kind of. He's better than a third center, not quite. Quite as good as a 2A or whatever. So, and we all know like. They kind of need to figure out like what they think their plan is going to be before they make their draft pick, in 4 weeks or whatever time it is now.
Especially because two of the potential draftees are potential centers in Sarr and Kling, and so I'm with you 100%.
So is there a chance Clint gets traded on draft night? Like
Yes. I'll answer that question. Yes, there is. Right. There's a chance. Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of pending decisions around this position for sure, even right now.
All right, that is all for part 1 of 2 with my friend Glen Willis talking about Clint Capela, and part 2 should be available in your same podcast feed right now. So go ahead and click over to that podcast and finish out this conversation. Please subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. I do appreciate everyone listening to the podcast. One more plug, I should say, for part 2. It's available for you right now, and we'll see you all next time.